Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to IXR Real Talk, where we are talking for real. Industry experts come together here on episode 4, and we want to come together and talk about failing forward and being in the difficult position of having to try things first. And it is a difficult position. It opens you up to opportunities where you're going to be looked at, judged, and very few people want to be in that position. It is the place of the courageous only. And it is certainly a topic that everyone here on this call understands pretty well. So if you're in that position where you are afraid to fall forward and be the person who has to try things first, trust me, it is a place of courage, and where there is much blame, there is much glory. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the cast here at IXR Real Talk. I'm Dr. Torrance Temple. Here and joining us is Megan, Anna, Colin, and Cambria. So let's get this thing started. Let's talk about the last opportunity you had where you had to fail forward and it didn't go well. How did you handle it?
Oh man, I think that's on a daily basis. I feel like there's something that I try new. As someone who's a constant entrepreneur and innovator, even into the education space, which is very, very risk averse, right? That when we have a problem in education, oftentimes we gather together and talk about it for a really long time. And so I am someone who takes the talk and goes into action. So that has also translated here into my journey of IXR, where I left a place for 25 years that I knew and loved to start a company with this wonderful team. And failing forward is when you're able to look humbly at yourself and say, I did okay on this, but it didn't land the way I wanted it. So I remember my first pitch for this company. Actually, I'm kind of mortified by my first pitch for this company. It's just really relevant. Like the first time I met with one of my friendlies as we're getting the company off the ground. And I remember I am so excited about the foundational neuroscience and the research behind what we're doing. And so I led the conversation with this really highbrow, very detailed, very education focused, but very much doctoral level conversation. And the person on the other end was like a typical administrator and teacher, right? I'm exhausted. I'm tired. I don't really have time to have a PhD level conversation with you. And I realized really quick that while I value the amount of hours that we have put into aligning our work with research and science and what we know education needs, that the people on the other end needed the bridged version of that to be able to actually land with our product. So, jumping into conversations and humbly acknowledging shortfalls and being okay saying, that one didn't go so great, was awesome for me. So, landing and try, but I'm glad I tried. And now I have a much better opportunity when I speak to people to know what works and what doesn't, because I've taken the time to honestly fail. And
I think people appreciate that, right? I mean, and to be open and honest. And I think that's one of the things that as your one of your big strengths is that you step into this in a very open, honest way. And Colin, you started very early, where being a kid, stepping out into the business world, it's almost the ignorance is bliss, where you just don't know. How did you coffer the amount of, I don't know, bravado it needed to succeed at that young age? I mean, what brought you out that early?
I think, some of my story of, doing stuff high performance at, playing professional pool at the age of 11 and 12, and then stripping back computers at 13, and so on from there. I think it was the fact of I didn't know any different, and it was survival. And that's where it came from. And then starting my first business, it just went from there. It wasn't until I was in my mid-20s that I saw failure as a good thing. I always saw failure as something to be scared of. And then with hiring across the world, it was then people that was being hired, we were hiring into the different teams. People were scared of failure. And then that became really dangerous in the type of work that we're doing with and the type of projects that we were working on, because they would cover things up. And so we had this culture then that we would celebrate, failure. And, I love the topic of failing forward. One of my mentors, John C. Maxwell, fantastic book. Failing Forward. He's also got a really good book called 5 Levels of Leadership. Really, really good books. And we used to get all of our teams to read this. There's another one, which is Go for No. So for sales. And so that, it was just about that culture. But very early on in my career, there wasn't a choice. You had to just do it. And it was about survival. And then it was then about having that fear of failure. And then thankfully in my early mid-20s, it was then, okay, no, that we can reframe this. And that's how we've done it. So because
interesting,
the culture that I have is that if you're not failing, you're not moving forward. And the faster you fail, the more successful that you are. So every single day we're looking at failure points to how do we fail, and then how we then learn from that, get the data, and then move forward.
Interesting. Lucy, you are in a different country, and that has to be, is that culture different? Is it looked at differently? And I don't mean to transition from Colin's like value of failure and go, oh, by the way, Lucy, but you are in a you're in a completely different environment, and you deal with a different clientele. Is that viewed differently?
Well, I guess my biggest question is just about how failing has gotten easier for me and for probably everybody on this call. And yes, being in a different country has helped, because learning a different language or being outside of the culture and making faux pas and doing all of these ridiculous things, which, I was used to doing in the United States. So, it's not that much of a stretch to do it outside of the country as well. But doing it purposefully versus not knowing that you're doing it definitely can catch you off guard. But I want to throw the question back to you and to everybody here. Like, how have you gotten comfortable failing? What was it that you did, or what happened to you that made it more, I don't know, part of your life or easier?
I think part of that is communicating to everyone else around you that that's the goal. And so when you fail, people go, oh, okay, well, this is us trying things. I had a principal, probably one of the best I'd ever had. And she was very open. She's like, we're going to try things and they may not work. But we are going to learn from that. And so this is a staff of action, and we're going to move forward, and things may go sideways. Things may go horribly sideways. But what we're going to do is we're going to learn from that, figure out what's going to happen, and we're going to move forward. We're going to make a decision on that. And I think one of the best things about her approach was the fact that she was openly communicating that that was the plan. So the fear of judgment kind of disappears when everyone knows that's the intent.
And what I hear from you is that leadership matters. And I think that there's a culture in schools, and I've said it a lot of times, where teachers or administrators feel like they have to be, I call it the Mary Poppins Syndrome, right? Where you have this really big magic bag, and all of the problems that are happening on your campus, you as the administrator or the teacher must have something magic in your power that will solve it. And I think this permeates through the system, where you are expected as an educator, as a principal, as a superintendent, to just handle the environment around you, right? There's a lot of things in schools that you cannot control that impact the quality and the ability for a school to be innovative, right? So we're talking about failure. Failure is a part of a culture of innovation, the culture of trying. And so I think, you talked about being open and honest about it. And what I would say is I've heard so many times when I'm speaking about my work starting a school or talking to a teacher who's in an environment or a culture, Tory, unlike your principal, where they don't have the support. They are succumbed to the standards. They're succumbed to the dashboards. What matters is grades, percentage of completion, attendance, proficiency rates. And we know across the country how those things are going. But they still remain the number one priority in education, where this idea of seeing a problem and doing something about it makes you an outlier. You might be misunderstood. You might not, you are doing something in a culture that is against the norm, where your results in your classroom might be astronomical, but they're not spreading across the culture of the school because the foundation or the culture in the system is not allowing for those innovative moves to be celebrated. And I see that consistently. And I hear that, well, Meg, you started a charter school and the charter schools have more flexibility than my school. And I would always say, well, no, you have to create the culture that you want. And so
that's an interesting point. And that leadership creates the culture, which sets the value for what success is. And you bring up a really interesting point. There's a tendency for administrators, and I think this is probably more true with new administrators, because they see that that's the measure that they're judged, are those dashboard numbers or the state numbers. But what if you have a teacher who puts butts in seats, who has a waiting list for their class, but their district assessment scores are kind of meh. They're not really that great from year to year, but kids go home and they talk about what they learned and they talk to their friends about what they learned. Where is that considered a failure or success? I would wonder, and you can probably answer to this, how do you mitigate that as either as a failure or a success when the county says, but your numbers, and you're like, but my attendance, and here's what my parents are saying, and here's what the kids are saying. Where's the line there that defines success versus failure?
I would say it depends on what your goal is as the administrator or as the educator, right? So I also would be very surprised if kids that are that actively engaged and are showing up are scoring low, maybe immediately, maybe in the short term, but over the long term, what I've seen in my own classrooms and my colleagues is that if you have students that are going home and talking about whatever's going on in your classroom, the results and the scores eventually show up and start impressing you in ways that you may have not expected.
Yeah, and one of the things you just brought up, Lucy, was implementation dip, right? So when you are innovative and you're trying something new in schools, right, something's got to give because you're taking time to do something different. So if something has given, oftentimes what happens immediately upon implementation of something new is that maybe your assessment results go down because your priorities have shifted to something different. So in order for you to see long-term gains, you need some long-term implementation. So a lot of times schools are very risk averse because when they try or implement even new curriculum, so you see this in curriculum adoption, you might see a dip year one where you won't see increased improvement year two because people have to learn a new way of doing something. Students need time to learn a new way of doing something. And Anna, you see this firsthand all the time in your coaching. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, and you all mentioned the main point that I was going to mention is the culture, and not just the culture of your organization, but the culture of, the country that you live in. Because I was brought up in the UK where schools encourage you to get it wrong, and then it's the speed of recovery that is the element of success, right? How quickly can you come back from setbacks? That's a little bit of the culture of education here. And then I went to work in France where you don't get anything wrong, right? Don't get it wrong. And then moved to Mexico where you definitely don't even mention that there's anything going wrong because, we just keep it. Those environments I've worked in have been really hard because you feel you're putting on a pretense constantly that everything's okay. But going back to what you said, Lucy, if we ask what the purpose of education is, right? And I mean globally, what does education mean? What's it for? Then we have to make space for failing because that's how humans learn best, right? As long as we come back from it. And so, yes, working with teachers who's saying to me, can I do that? Like, is that okay? Even if it takes a bit longer, can I say that this is success when it doesn't necessarily fit the checklist? But again, Lucy, going back to what you said, I think once you've allowed students to get it wrong and to come back and try again and again throughout their lives, they are going to ace those tests because they've worked out how to, look at obstacles, find the strategies to get beyond them, looking at those lifelong skills that'll help them to get through the test. So I think, yes, there may be a dip. And we see this, it might take you longer. You may not cover everything on your curriculum, but look at the outcome, the long-term outcome. And this is where I always argue that some things need to change. AI is the catalyst for change of what are we prizing, right, at the end of the day.
I always get so excited when I hear all of you talk that I can't help but jump in. I'm sorry, Tory. Just give me 1 second because
It's okay. It's okay. Go.
Because Meg said a minute ago about how we're seeing a problem and doing something about it. And so I'm thinking about that. And I'm thinking about something you said yesterday too, Meg, about students who have a chance to try and to think. And when we take the thinking out, and Anna, what you just said about the answer already being given through AI. So it's not about the answer. It always comes back to the thinking. Where can we see thinking happening? So Tory, all of these opportunities to fail, now I'm not just focused on the failure anymore. Instead, where others see like confusion or chaos, I'm seeing, and people that have failed a lot and are okay with the failure, just like that's part of it. That's a step in the process, right? It's like, I know how to navigate this. I have an opinion. So one of the teachers that Anna and I were working with, you might know who I'm talking about, said that with students that are doing this, they say, well, I might not know that answer if you ask them any random question, but it makes me think of this other thing, and they're drawing connections and they're coming up with a possible solution. And that's what I think is really part of this whole process, that you can think of a conceivable next step instead of just being blocked.
So a lot of teachers would come back and have this question of, well, I have a lot of kids failing my class. They're just failing. So we're talking about failing. Right. So the literal translation is I have kids that aren't showing up to school. I have kids that aren't, are failing in the system that we're in and are failing my class. They don't care about the assignments. They're using AI to complete their assignments, which we know many students are. So they're already failing. And so, why, what are you talking about? What does this really mean? And I think we really need to clarify what the failing means for us, particularly in this conversation. And I have my thoughts, but I'd love to hear the teams. You guys are so diverse. What do you think failing means, Cam, in this conversation?
As someone who doesn't like the feeling of that, I would assume most don't. I had to reframe it similar to the way we were talking about it, because I'm very much a perfectionist, very much an overthinker. So I grew up thinking like failure is just like, that's not what you do, not an option. Until reframing it and going like, that sort of discomfort means you can grow from here. It means there's room to improve, and that there's kind of a comfort in that. And ever since reframing that, like my young adult life has become easier because reframing it is like, okay, well, because I'm always afraid of like, why start it when, oh, what if I fail? What if? And then now it's like, no, this is the necessary, I expect to. And if I do, then I know that I'm making progress. And that,
but I think
the
difference is it's failing forward, isn't it? It's failing. It's not just, it's okay to fail. It's, you have to fail in order to do the learning, I know my father, when I was young, would just throw me in the sea, get on your windsurf and get back to shore, work it out, and I knew from the very beginning that was only a good exercise if I actually got back to shore, right? No good me like flailing around in the water.
Yeah. Oops, I'm short a kid now.
that wasn't going to be very fun. But we have to, when we're talking about the startup culture, right? I know when I left employment and went out as an independent consultant and started working in that environment, it was very scary, but it goes right back to what I always talk about. We need divergent thinking in the classroom. And it's always convergent thinking. It's always, let's take it down to what the answer is at the end. But the divergent thinking is where we get creative, where we invent new thoughts and processes. And, when you're not allowed to do that, you get the kids kicking and screaming because they have a lot of potential and creativity. And so we get all kinds of behavioral problems, because I think as humans, we naturally need challenge and we need to struggle in order to feel that satisfaction that we're doing okay in life. So I think we have to build it in somewhere.
Yeah, agreed. And I think Megan brought up, as we reached the bottom of our conversation here, brought up an incredibly important organizational and systemic idea that needs to be addressed. And for all of us who have put in decades into organizational success, education in general, and have watched how quickly education specifically will turn its back on something the second it looks like it's not going to work. And Megan, you brought up a term, it was called implementation dip, where you watch, and this is systemic. I think Colin would agree that anytime you change course on something, things will adjust. Or if you take a major programmatic change, stuff has to take time to adjust. And not adjusting and not allowing that to adjust. And I can speak to the area that I'm in, especially in low performing districts, high minority districts, low SES districts. They filter through leadership like nobody's business, and they don't leave people in a place long enough to allow them to sort of feel that implementation, because new leadership, a new principle, that's implementation, and that vision takes time to then put into play and allow it to move. So as we finish this thing up here, and we ask the question, how do you push through the implementation dip, understanding that it's going to happen? What do you tell people that makes them feel comfortable with that idea?
I think
Tori,
it
can I
just
give
on
everybody
my
a
side of
second to
stuff.
think about that?
go ahead.
Sorry, I should have directed that, because I know everybody's got an answer to this. So let's go real quick as we go through this. Colin, you got 30 seconds. Meg, you got 30 seconds. Lucy, you got 30 seconds. Go.
Okay, cool. For me, it's about the planning ahead. It's going, okay, if we're going to make a pivot, the equilibrium is going to be upset. It's going to take time for things to calm back down. And you actually want the implementation dip. You are looking for the implementation dip, because if you don't have it, you've done something wrong. And then, so it's being able to then pivot out of that as you're going through it. So it's something to be rewarded and to be looked for, not to be avoided.
And for me, it's really making sure that you're honing in on realistic expectation. So what oftentimes in education, we're expecting to solve all of the problems with one implementation, right? And so realistically looking at the largest issue, so let's just say, for example, math literacy, which is a huge issue across most schools, specifically in tough areas. Well, what do we have students do? We have them go to credit recovery, which oftentimes is, to be honest with you, something that is not as high quality as the traditional semester. It's crammed in a short amount of time, and it's about completion, not understanding.
100%. Yep.
So now the students are getting through the course, but we're not sure if they're learning. So the idea is taking a problem that is a problem in the system, looking at it in a narrow lens and trying to do things differently with quality, and beginning to build this culture of asking questions. One quote that I love from a leader that I've worked with for many years, he says, you got to love them enough to know where they're at and never leave them there. So the goal is making sure that you love them enough. You say, this is where we're at. I know you've worked hard. I know you've tried to get here, but I'm not leaving you here. Child with an F in my class. Yeah. Child who thinks you're a failure, I'm not leaving you here. You are better than this. We can do this together, and building that micro steps of culture, the paperclip. Yeah. You know, one paperclip a day, making it realistic, because over the year, you're going to find systematic change with one initiative. So doing one thing and doing it really well, inch wide, mile deep.
Mm-hmm. And knowing the child's position neurochemically, adolescently, culturally, all of those factors go into what their efficacy and expectancy kind of box is. Mm-hmm. And I think that's an area we tend to neglect in our game planning to figure out where the improvements are. Lucy, you get to be the last commenter here. So
amazing.
Make it good.
Okay, let's see what we can do, because the biggest thing that I can't let go, I can't finish this conversation without going back to. So when Meg talked about this, teachers that have students that are just failing, they're not doing anything. So there's a very big difference between failing actively and failing passively. And if they're failing passively, that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about trying something and it not working out immediately and continuing to fight forward so that there's growth. And as long as growth is happening, we're not leaving them wherever they are, because we love them enough to keep working with them and keep going.
Absolutely. So let's end up with this. I think if your fundamentals are solid, and I think we would agree that the fundamentals might work down to behavioral understanding, neurochemical positioning of the students, cultural understanding of where they're living and how they're growing up, their age, because they all don't think it the same way at the same time, and allowing the administration to understand that element. And then when your fundamentals, when your programs address those fundamentals, It's okay if things don't work out right away. They have to attenuate. They have to figure out where they fit, how it seeps into the roots, and how it gets uptaken by the plant. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here at Real Talk. That's the buzzer. I don't know if you can hear that, but I want to make sure that we are staying on time. So thank you for being here. IXR Talking for Real. This is our Real Talk, and we hope you gathered something out of this and can implement it soon and make it meaningful for your world. I'm Dr. Torrance Temple. Thank you, team. You guys are amazing, and we'll see you next time.
We will see you next time.